Thanks to everyone for joining me here today. I'm a marine biologist and I specialise in the field of aquatic animal health. And I'm here today to talk to all of you about water quality and habitat. Because as a professional scientist, environmental health and biosecurity are the two main topics that I study. And these are also two critical factors that underpin the productivity and the health of our fisheries and our aquaculture industries in this country. Now, marine parks are also supposed to be about environmental health. Because a healthy ecosystem is resilient, it's filled with healthy animals, and it generally has high biodiversity. That's what people are interested in. I've become involved in this marine parks debate recently since I was asked to evaluate the science that the government used, the federal government used to justify declaration of a coral sea conservation zone. But also as a private citizen, I'm greatly concerned about what's happening in my local marine park near where I live here in Moreton Bay. Now, as an aquatic animal health specialist, I work on the actual mechanisms, the nuts and bolts that hold these ecosystems together. It's apparent to me that there's a disconnect between the reality of the biological processes that are happening in these areas that are threatening biodiversity of fish stocks, places like Moreton Bay, and the area management tools that many lay people, politicians and even some scientists think can actually solve the problems. So there's a disconnect there. To complicate matters further, we've got green groups that are spreading basically misleading information via media. They're paying for some science that's actually quite questionable. And it's been trotted out to support a view that's fairly extreme and essentially states that everything will be okay as long as you've got marine parks and fishing, no fishing closure as big as possible. So that's the general message that we're hearing. Here in Queensland, it's apparent by the actions of the state government, they also genuinely seem to believe that expanding marine parks and fishing closures will actually solve complex environmental problems. So in late 2010, for example, a press release from the Queensland Government's Minister for Climate Change and Sustainability was headlined, "Marine life is thriving in Moreton Bay green zones." Now that press release described how increased numbers of male mud crabs above the minimum legal size in sanctuary zones in Moreton Bay showed that the sanctuaries were working and that we expect these levels will lead to greater numbers of fish and crabs moving outside the green zones. They're actual quotes from the press release. However, when you look at that science, the reality is that sort of research is only telling you the obvious, and that's that no fishing is occurring in the no fishing zone. That's what that science tells you. In fact, I can tell you right now, we can expect minimal or even zero increase in productivity of mud crabs from the increased sanctuary zone areas of Moreton Bay. And the reason why is because female mud crabs are already fully protected by law in Queensland. In other words, the females are already no take. Furthermore, the male and female crabs, they mature at around 9 or 10 centimetres, which is 5 centimetres below the minimum size that we use for the males. So all the female crabs are already fertilised by the time that they go out to spawn. So it's actually a very conservative fisheries management arrangement. So because of that, it means the sanctuary zones are likely to do nothing to boost the number of mud crab eggs that are produced, or improve the survival of the larvae as they get vectored back by the currents back to the inshore area. So that press release by the Queensland Environment Minister basically demonstrates a staggering lack of understanding of the limits of the utility of sanctuary zones for helping fisheries and biodiversity. Now, mud crabs only live for 3 or 4 years. Since existence, any one mud crab in a sanctuary zone is always temporary. So it's not about that, it's about recruitment. It's about movements of the smaller mud crabs back into the nursery areas. Because these animals they're continually being eaten. It's a food chain. It's not finding Nemo out there. It's a real food chain. So recruitment of mud crabs is the key to their persistence. And a much better measure of the effectiveness of these sanctuary zones is how many sublegal mud crabs there will be coming through. Because if you're getting more of these little crabs coming through, you're getting better recruitment, and that's what we want to see. So, because egg and larval survival of the mud crab is dictated by the water quality, and the habitat quality and availability will determine the number of those little juvenile mud crabs, getting up there in the mangroves and things like that. Because they're the things that actually drive mud crab production, the science suggests that the current highly conservative fisheries management arrangements in Queensland are more than adequate to maximise the number of mud crabs available for the fishery, especially in view of the degraded environment we have in the inshore areas like Moreton Bay. Now, in fact, researchers in Moreton Bay have recorded a widespread collapse of called macrobenthic in fauna in Moreton Bay. It's a 97.5% reduction in the number of animals that live in the mud and in the sand compared to some of these areas in mining settings. That is a huge loss. We've also seen significant dieback of key habitats such as the seagrasses, mangroves and the oyster reefs. Now, these environmental problems have significantly reduced both the food and the habitat availability for your mud crabs in a manner that's far more likely to have long-term negative impacts on their populations than fishing for the adult crabs above the 15 centimetre size. So these exact same environmental problems also explain why researchers from the University of Queensland found no statistical difference in fish biodiversity between areas that were open and closed to fishing in the Moreton Bay. Now, the University of Queensland researchers, first of all, they didn't conduct any baseline studies, so I don't know how they could come to the conclusion by saying, you know, the marine parks were preserving biodiversity when they didn't know what was there before the marine park was implemented. But that's another matter entirely. But the most plausible explanation for those findings is that biodiversity in all of those areas is being degraded severely. And that's due to poor water quality, which is mainly sedimentation, nutrient loading, and pollution that originates from the adjacent land use and the urbanisation. So, and this has been demonstrated by the losses of seagrasses, the macrobenthic fauna, mangroves, oysters, and bivalves in Moreton Bay Marine Park. We're actually seeing, you know, fish kills that are quite common now in the park itself. So kills of those adult fish, you know, we're seeing adult fish dying in some of these areas. So that's just a tip of the iceberg stuff, like classic telltale signs of declining environmental water quality and environmental quality. Because when adults can't survive, the unseen mortality of those little eggs and those little juveniles is astronomical, it's huge. So, you know, in 2009, the Moreton Bay ecosystem received its lowest rating ever. It was a D in the Healthy Waterways Ecosystem Monitoring Program. Now, the definition for D is as follows. Poor, meaning many key processes are not functional, and most critical habitats are severely affected. Now, one of the first key ecological processes that's rendered non-functional by reduced water quality is the survival of the little fish larvae and the invertebrate larvae in that plankton. Because that recruitment relies on, you know, these are sensitive planktonic stages. They're tiny. So it's basically death of the larval stages. It represents a significant loss of biodiversity, but they're basically invisible. People don't see them, so it's out of sight and out of mind. However, these tiny organisms are actually the building blocks for your marine ecosystem. And you know, we can actually visualise this near where I live in Moreton Bay Marine Park by the declines of decades-old rock oyster clumps near where I live. We can actually see the clumps are dying. It's a very rare situation where we can actually visualise a recruitment failure process. Mostly it's just out of sight, out of mind. And those oyster clumps are proving that it's actually happening, it's actively happening. So the biological and ecological reality of the situation in Moreton Bay Marine Park is that healthy waterways is actually the most accurate indicator. It's accurate. It's the accurate indicator of the true condition of Moreton Bay. Yet right now we have the state government actually trying to fast track even more development in the Pumicestone Passage area near where I live. It's a development for an additional 50 to 70,000 people, and it's called Caloundra South. So, you know, because of that, and because we've got media releases saying marine life is thriving in the Moreton Bay green zones, I mean, it's giving the public real mixed messages about what's actually happening. You know, what are the real threatening processes to environmental health in Moreton Bay? And they're also basically exaggerating, you know, impressions of benefits, if any, that you'll get from you know, fishing sanctuary zones. So, in fact, if you actually believe those media releases and accept the government's view that the only areas where marine life is thriving in Moreton Bay is in the green zones, well, basically they're saying the government is blaming fishing for the decline of Moreton Bay. Because if it's only thriving in the green zones and we know it's not everywhere else, what's the difference? They're blaming fishing. So to put all this in your layman's terms, the Moreton Bay Marine Park is being oversold in a pretty big way at the moment. In reality, it's a terrestrial equivalent. You know, the terrestrial equivalent of the Moreton Bay Marine Park is putting a national park in a garbage dump. That's the equivalent. The reality is the Moreton Bay Marine Park is basically